Okay, in this lesson we're going to take a look at a book called Ethics for Adversaries by Arthur Applebaum. His main topic in the book is the morality of roles in adversarial institutions. Well, what are some examples? We'll take the courts, for example. We have prosecuting attorneys and defense attorneys, and they interact in the courtroom. Now, neither side is necessarily pursuing truth. Rather, they're going to spin the facts of the case in favor of their client, right? But out of the whole process, justice is supposed to happen. Police interrogations, another example. They have a person, they're questioning the person. The police are allowed to lie in order to secure either a confession or just get information out of the person they're interrogating. So again, the police and the person, they have different interests. They're in an adversarial situation. Free market context, we have buyers and sellers with different interests in an adversarial relationship. Employers, employees. Political candidates in the political process, of course, are adversaries. So the question is, how can acting in adversarial institutions morally justify harmful actions that would otherwise be prohibited? Right, so Applebaum's going to claim that in these adversarial institutions, the participants sometimes engage in behaviors that in another context we would see as wrong. So the political candidates, they're going to mislead in their advertising, right? Maybe the buyers and sellers are going to mislead in their pitches, you know. The police interrogator might lie to get a confession. The lawyers are spinning the information, right, in order to promote the view of their client. Now, in other contexts, some of these behaviors we might want to say are morally wrong. Yet, in an adversarial institution, they are permitted. So, Applebaum wants to get to the bottom of that. How should we look at that? How can we look at that? The conflict in general is that participants adopt roles that are partisan. So, you know, they have a limited perspective, and the other parties in the process might have a different perspective. So participants adopt roles that are partisan, and so in conflict with others, and they claim the right to intentionally harm others because doing so will promote valued outcomes. In the case of the courts, it was justice. In the case of free markets, we're going to say the valued outcome would be something like prosperity. Now, the roles that we'll consider: buyer, seller, employer, employee. Now, here's a market example then. Why is the business owner immune from moral criticism when he or she pays a low wage, for example, or lays off a worker, which we might think of as causing harm to the worker? Right, so we're going to use the market examples to help us understand Applebaum's arguments and get a deeper understanding of these adversarial institutions and the ethics that we might think apply or don't apply. Now, you recall from the price gouging case in Sandel's book, we had a couple of options how we want to look at price gouging, right? So, I mean, on the one hand, the free market defenders might say, well, see, the free market system is a non-moral system. There is no fair price. So from that point of view, we can't blame or we can't criticize from a moral point of view the seller who raises the price of water up to $20, right? There is no fair price. The market sets the price. If there are people willing to pay, that is a beneficial interaction for both parties, right? Or we might say, you'll recall, another kind of defense of this behavior is that the role of an economic actor protects the individual from criticism. See, this point that we made in the price gouging case is exactly one of the things that Applebaum's going to focus on in his analysis. So we might want to say, well, look, see, the role of market participant here protects this individual from criticism, moral criticism from others who might think of themselves as harmed from this situation. The other view we took, right, was that taking advantage of another's misfortune is wrong. We might want to bring a different set of moral principles to this case and say, no. Yeah, they are a market participant, but that does not completely excuse them from behavior that might be harming others, right? You know, in virtue theory, what kind of person does this, right? Shouldn't they have concern for others who are also thirsty but maybe don't have as much money to pay for for the water. So those were viewpoints that we looked at in the price gouging case. Now, for Applebaum's book here, we're going to just consider the case of owner and worker, so employer-employee. And we'll imagine a scenario where there's some factory, some business, right? And here we have the owner. Now, maybe it's a family-owned business, or maybe it is a corporation, and the owners would be the shareholders and so on. But let's just keep it simple. Let's say it is owned by this person right here, right, who is employing the workers. Okay, so we've got the case of an adversarial relationship. Of course, it's not only an adversarial relationship. We can see this as mutually beneficial also, but we're going to focus on the adversarial nature of this relationship. So we've got two roles in the economy. We've got the owner and the worker. And let's say the situation is, which is very much in the news in the past 10, 15 years or so, that the owner can increase profits by moving the factory overseas. All right. So here the factory is in America. Here's an American worker. Now the owner sees some opportunity to maybe cut labor costs, move the factory overseas. All right, that would increase the owner's profits. Kind of like the price gouging case, we can ask the question, is the worker harmed by this? Right? So the owner is going to close down the factory. You no longer have a job. Well, from the worker's point of view, that hurts. Now the question is, did the owner harm the worker? Right? So kind of like in the price gouging case, we were asking, is anybody harmed? If so, who or what was harming the thirsty people? Is the owner harming the worker in this case? Now, Applebaum is going to present several arguments. We're going to look at 5 ways that the owner might defend him or herself from the accusation that they're harming the worker. Defense number 1 is the one we saw before in the case of the price gouging. You can blame the role, right? So the business owner is playing a role that permits such harm to the worker. So in the context of free market dynamics, right, so that the free market system prescribes certain roles to owners and workers such that owners are, quote unquote, allowed to cause such harm. Now, Applebaum, throughout his book raises counter arguments as well, so we can see sort of different moral viewpoints on this. Counter argument might be that, well, what does this mean? How can roles mint new moral permissions? And you might say that they cannot. The role of being the owner does not permit you to cause such harm, one might say. So roles do not have any independent moral force or grounding. Right? So here's our owner. In my role as owner, I am permitted to maximize profit. You cannot blame me, right? So claiming protection, immunization from moral criticism. The worker is going to say, well, you didn't have to do this, right? You could have accepted less profit, which means you intentionally harmed me. So here we see the two views. The owner is claiming the right to harm the worker, and the worker is saying that is not acceptable. So the first defense for the owner, we're going to call that the blame the role defense. Applebaum's going to go on to give us 4 more that we'll take a look at in the next part.